Infinity. Infinity is a symbol that is defined by something without bounds. Some scholars say that it traces its roots to ancient Mesopotamia in the ancient writing system of cuneiform. For me, hope symbolizes renewal, progress, and hope. Infinity was something very close to me. But I learned this when I first went to Iraq. In 2011, Iraq, which is my family's home of origin. When I first went to Iraq in November of 2011, it was to coach the TEDx talks there. It was the first ever TEDx talks in Baghdad. People are like, this is going to be impossible. But when we got there, I had to overcome so much in terms of so much pushback from people saying safety and issues and are you sure you want to go? But I did. Me and about 5 or 10 other hyphenated Iraqis from around the world, we went to Baghdad. But when I got there, something special happened. I was awestruck. I remember we were lucky because I was able to walk in the streets for the first and actually only time I've ever had the opportunity to do so as a citizen. And when I got there, I remember walking in the streets and seeing the fish, masgoof, actually being cooked on an open fire. I remember going to a restaurant and having falafel with amba, which is pickled mangoes. And I remember tasting, and it tasted like almost identical, if you can imagine, from what my father and my family had told me when I was a kid. I remember looking up at the sky and seeing the moon almost identical to how large and exaggerated my father had told me I was a kid. I remember seeing family for the first time, and yet it felt like I had seen them all my life. I met people who for the first time in my life actually looked like me. It was an incredible experience that really placed me in a moment that I just never thought I would have. So about that TEDx, we were there for a week. And I met students, entrepreneurs, scholars, professors, architects, people of all landscapes in Iraq. One person really stood out, Manhal al-Haboubi. Manhal was a gifted architect of simple roots. And he had just come to fame because he won a prize designing the Council of Ministers Secretariat building in Iraq. And in designing this building, he wanted to overcome the religious divisions that existed in Iraq, the political sectarian divisions that also existed, and the schisms. And so he hearkened back to a time of ancient Mesopotamia. And he found inspiration in that cuneiform writing and in that symbol of infinity. This is what he designed. Well, I guess you can't see it, but up there, that central structure, he designed it in the shape of infinity. So if you look at it from above, it looked like infinity. And on the facade of it, you see cuneiform. So it far exceeded any of the ideas of religion and which religion did you belong to, which political parties. And it was built right there. I mean, it was designed to be built right there on the banks of the Euphrates. When he gave that speech, I can't even tell you what the audience did. We had 600 people packed in a room in the Rashid Hotel. The tears, the claps, the stomping of the feet, the standing ovation led by the Prime Minister himself, who assured everybody there that this will be built. It will stand as a testament to the hope, the resilience, the pride of the Iraqi people. What a moment. But let me take you back to my youth. Let me put all this into context. I was born in Geneva. I lived most of my life in Cairo and California. But my father was a staunch, proud Iraqi nationalist, so proud of his roots. So he taught us Arabic. He taught us about the cultural nuances, the taste of the food, the way it smelled, what the vegetables looked like, the cultural nuances that just pervaded the country in terms of its tradition. And yet he actually hadn't been back to Iraq since the 70s because of the war and the sanctions and the civil strife and all the things that were happening there. But he taught us those concepts. And he did something else. He's an incredibly gifted artist. Through his art, and actually I put together a Wikipedia page for him where you can see all of this, but through his art, he designed the structures of his art like the artifacts of Iraq. Sculptures in the shape of ziggurats, reliefs with Islamic calligraphy and political messages. An incredible man. The loyalty I had for him and for Iraq was so deeply entrenched in me. And yet I'd never even been there. And I only knew a couple of Iraqis growing up in Egypt and California. Yet it was strong. It ran deep. And so it was around that time, actually I think in 1996, that I went from a pariah to a global citizen. I got the US passport. And suddenly all the doors opened to me and all the salutes, the stuff I had not seen until I was 16. And in came my first major identity crisis. How can I reconcile being an American, which was supporting the sanctions that were existing in Iraq, that was hurting so many people, while also being an Iraqi and having the loyalties to this man and to my family and to my ancestry? How could I do that? And so, in 2000, when we had the first election here that I could participate in, because I was over 18, I still remember just being so apathetic to the process, couldn't have cared less. Didn't really understand or appreciate democracy or any of that stuff. I mean, I had, for so long, lived in the Middle East where that stuff was just pipe dreams. And so I let it pass. But something happened that affected every one of you. September 11th. And I had a choice to make. Was I going to erase memory of my identity, an Iraqi, an Arab, a Muslim, a Kurd, and just be American? Or was I going to embrace it, stand strong, stand steadfast in the face of that countervailing force? Well, like the theme of this whole TEDx, this whole HKS talks, I obviously took the latter option. And so I became more of a social activist on campus, trying to find my identity, finding a community within the Arab community, the Arab American community in my university. Then another cataclysmic event happened, but on the opposite side of the world, in Iraq. The statue of Saddam fell, and Iraq changed. So where did I fit in this time? I asked myself that question, and I thought about it, ended up going to law school, and I said to myself, we have something in America that they don't have in Iraq, because we started seeing that, right? There were so many hopes and dreams at the wake of the liberation of Iraq. Man, they finally vote. People are dipping their fingers in ink. Democracy takes a hell of a long time to be able to take root. And so suddenly I started thinking about, what do we have here in America that I've been taking for granted? That sense of agency, that sense of democracy, that sense if you see an issue in society, you can vote to change it. So I became more actively involved. In 2004, in 2008, 2012, 2016, I got involved in the presidential elections in Florida, Nevada. Picked up a clipboard, knocked on doors. I was a lawyer, so I was able to monitor the elections to ensure that there was no disenfranchisement of any person unlawfully. But somehow, it wasn't enough. I kept on having to ask myself that question of identity. I need to do something more. So in 2012, I did something almost unthinkable, possibly because of that event in Iraq and what happened at TEDx. I just came back somehow just so much more pumped, and I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to do the unthinkable. Unthinkable. I joined the US government as an international attorney advisor with the US Department of Commerce. And my goal was to go out to countries in transition like Iraq and provide them with commercial law reform, advice and technical assistance, capacity building to help improve their laws, to encourage trade and investment. Why? To promote private sector reform. Why? To help those entrepreneurs, those students that I met in TEDx reach their full potential. And so that's what I did for 5 years. That's what I did. But it wasn't easy. On the opposite side of the street, they were the naysayers. You're a traitor. Why would you ever work for America? It brought the country to its knees. It watched the death of so many children, generations. You're Kurdish. Why would the Iraqis even listen to you? You never even lived in Iraq. You're not even one of them. But I held steadfast. I knew the purpose was greater. I knew I had to do something bigger. So I stood shoulder to shoulder with ministers, bureaucrats, technocrats, politicians, lawyers, students, you name it. We worked with them in Iraq. And work wasn't easy. But I was in a position of a lot of privilege. I spoke the language, and while I was a hyphenated identity, Iraqis in some instances opened their hearts and arms to me. I understand the nuances, the jokes, the linguistic technicalities that allow you to forge trust and bonds with your constituent. But I had to constantly balance that. The mandate to serve the US government with the desire to always best help the Iraqi people. It's a tough one. But I remember one day we were doing a program helping judicial capacity building. And I remember this judge came up to me, beaming with pride, and said to me, I read the poetry of your great-granduncle in school, into Ibn al-Balad. You are a son of this nation. What a vindication. I took a chance. I hoped that if I took this job, it would help. Who would have thought that such hope would fuel a sense of redemption? A redemption to be able to see who I was and my identity, this constant conflict that I had. And so, I thought to myself, there's something to be said about that same symbol. As you can see with infinity, there's hope, renewal, and progress. But if it's not harnessed, it's not galvanized, you sink back to despair, to loss, and to regression. And so I did everything I could, almost using this as like a symbol of me, that same symbol that Menhal used, so powerful in its essence, to really capture this core concept. Hope informs purpose. Purpose ignites action. Action can help with service. Hope, purpose, action, service. Constantly trying to push over that, trying to provide that sense of renewal and that sense of hope for myself. So you may be asking yourselves now, whatever happened to that building? Well, in October of 2015, I was driving through the green zone, I remember clearly. And as I looked in the distance, I'm like, I know what that is. And I looked closer, and I said, wow, that's the same design, the same image that we had on those screens that got the audience up on its feet. 4 years later, as I looked over the billboard on the other side, you can't see it there through the palm tree, but on the other side of that billboard, there was a bunch of rusting cranes on an empty project site. A dream deferred. Hope fleeting. But I swear to you, every Iraqi I met had a sense of resilience and hope deep in their hearts that went far beyond just one building. Menhal left us pondering a question that day. He said, Iraq is infinity. It survived for 5,000 years and will survive for another 5,000. But he asked us, what is the Iraq that we're going to give our children? Is it better than the ones we were given by our fathers and our fathers' fathers? What a salient question. When the last election symbolized a sense of apathy, when global displacement of refugees is pervasive, When regional disintegration in Europe we're seeing it, when there's internal divisions here at home in America, how do we answer that question? Hope, purpose, action, service. Through that, I found my redemption. Through that, I was able to do a lot, I hope, I think, for many people. Not just in Iraq, throughout the Gulf, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, through my work. It was a very powerful concept. And so, I ask you again that question. But before I do, I want to say, Martin Luther King once asked, or told us, the arc of moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, just as it bends there. But I believe it bends through hope. Hope that allowed me to overcome, or at least grapple with, my identity crisis. Hope that has allowed the Iraqis to harness resilience in the face of constant calamity. Hope that tomorrow, you, our leaders, will be able to harness that to do something much greater because of that fundamental question that I go back to. What is the Iraq, the Mexico, the Canada, the Syria that we hope to pass to our children? Let us aspire to give a country that's better than the one we were given. Thank you.